Hi everyone and welcome back to the garden. I certainly didn't want to wait until a rainy Sunday afternoon to do this episode, but yesterday was a family day. It was absolutely chucking it down this morning, so this has been the first opportunity to get it done. And things are certainly changing here in the garden. The nights are drawing in now, they're really getting darker. It's getting cooler, there's more rain about. Hopefully we have got a bit of warm weather this week, but certainly I don't expect it to last forever, and those colder nights are certainly going to be coming around soon. So it's time to start thinking about winter preparation, how I overwinter some of the plants here in the garden, and a few little care tips to keep the ones that do stay outside staying healthy and growing strong for next year. So let's get into that now. My plan long term then is to do a series of videos looking at how I overwinter and protect specific plants, certainly the main ones in the garden. But I appreciate this year we're now in mid-October, and those of you, especially in colder areas, are already wanting to know how to protect certain plants and how to plan ahead to save them being damaged by the frost and the cold. So in order to help as many people as I possibly can, I wanted to do a video as a little tour going through the garden, just going through all the different areas. There certainly isn't a polished tour like the previous ones I've tried to do. I've not weeded the garden, I've not tidied anything up, there's autumn leaves just falling everywhere. So it's more of a just go through the garden, have a look at the different plants, and just go through briefly the main methods I use to protect them over winter. And obviously I can't cover everything in a huge amount of detail, but hopefully there's some value in this video, and if there's anything that I don't cover, any plant I just skim over, or any more detail that you think I could help with, then drop me a comment below, leave as many comments as you need, I'll come back to them, and then hopefully I'll be able to include that information in the more specific video I do down the line. So this might be a bit of a long video, but hopefully there's plenty in here to help as many of you as possible. What I will try to do is, once I've uploaded the video, add a chapter to each individual plant. So if you're short on time or just want to know about how to look after a specific plant, then just go to the video description and you'll be able to click on it there and it'll take you straight to that bit. So you don't have to sit through the whole video if you don't have the time to. But a few things I will mention before I start. Firstly, these are only the methods I use to look after plants. They're not the only way of doing things, and you might have more success with a different method. So I would encourage you, even if it's your first year, just to look around, do a bit of research, watch Yorkshire Chris's videos. He's got loads of great videos, and he often uses methods that I don't use myself, such as dry storing the Ensetes, whereas I tend to keep them in pots over winter. Craig at Grow Paradise, again, he's got loads of videos on winter care, how to look after the same sort of plants that I grow here. So it's well worth checking out other people, see what methods they use, and don't just take the method that I use as the only way of doing things. There may even be better ways of doing it than what I do. Second thing is, look at your location. Now, we're obviously in North Lincolnshire, about halfway up the country. Yes, it does get cold here, not as cold as, the Highlands in Scotland, but equally significantly colder than London and the south coast. So where you live in the country completely decides the amount of protection you need to give to plants. So like I've mentioned in a previous video, there might be things here that I protect that if you live in more central London, you don't have to protect at all. And equally, there might be things here that I do that in Scotland you still wouldn't get away with, and you have to actually dig those plants up and bring them in over winter. So it completely depends where you are, and the best single thing I could mention in that really is to go into the various Facebook groups such as Tropical Style Garden UK, go into them, see what people do in places near you. People that live in similar sort of locations with similar temperatures, and then just basically copy off them, because their info is so much more relevant than just watching a video from someone in a different part of the country. The third thing that I'll mention in this video, obviously some plants, they're dug up, brought inside, moved into polytunnel. It's very much a binary, they're in or they're out, job done until spring. Others have varying stages of protection through winter. But personally, I protect everything in the garden for a sort of average to slightly colder than average winter. I think really that's the only thing you can do, because if you're planning for a mild winter, it's always going to be colder. That's just the way that luck works. And you end up having to protect things last minute at night when it's already freezing, which isn't ideal. But equally, if you go over the top, like I mentioned in my 5 overwintering mistakes video, you can actually cause more harm than good overprotecting certain plants. So I think it's important to find a balance, and for me it's a case of either late October, maybe early November, try and get the plants that need to come inside, do the provisional wrapping on plants absolutely need it outside, then the rest I sort of play it by ear really. And as we're heading towards the colder spells, I ramp up the protection a little bit. But certainly I don't go straight, full protection on every single plant, wrapping up everything, fleecing the whole garden, because they won't appreciate that for months on end. Anyway, that's enough rambling, let's get on to the tour. Starting off then, let's look at the small shady tropical border. And this is the border, the area that I planted up around May, June time, specifically to do a video on it. And as you can see, it's already meshed together really well. To be fair, it actually looked pretty full within just a couple of months, and now it looks completely packed, absolutely full of tropical colour. And the main reason that I planted this border was to show that you didn't need to spend a huge amount of money or use all kinds of rare and hard to look after plants to create a tropical look. So the good news is, for this area at least, it doesn't really need much in the way of winter protection, if anything. So looking here, this is one plant that I have chopped back already, and that's Persicaria Purple Fantasy, which is a plant that, although it has flowers currently, it's mainly growing for the amazing leaves. That arrow pattern on them, it's incredible, but it's a plant that does get cut back by the frost. However, the good news is it's so quick at bouncing back. All it takes is a few mild days in sort of February, March, and it's already growing up again. By which point, it'll probably get zapped again by a late frost, but it'll come back again. It really is a tough plant that is just so easy to keep in the garden. All I have to do here is just hack it back a little bit to stop it going over the other plants. That's all it needs. So in terms of winter care, that's pretty much it for this area. You will notice one of my favourite sort of recommendations is a starter tropical plant, Fatsia japonica. Those with the glossy green leaves, they are a really nice addition to any kind of tropical garden. They're not expensive to buy, and when it comes to winter, you don't really need to do anything. In most gardens, most locations, they should be absolutely fine. And worst case, what you might notice is some of the new leaves in the middle, they might get blackened by the frost. You might get that growing tip just damaged a little bit, but the good news is the plants themselves, they're really tough and they'll grow back just fine. The best thing is just leave them to it and just trust that they will come back. If you have got a small plant though, definitely you can fleece it, just to give it a bit of extra protection during the coldest nights. And I'll probably say the same for the palm as well. That's a Trachycarpus wagnerianus. Again, most gardens, the waggies, they are really tough, but if you live somewhere that's certainly cold, or you've got a very young plant, then you can definitely protect it. Looking at the front of the border, I've got all kinds of colourful ferns, heucheras. All these plants, they're generally quite tough and they're generally evergreen. So whilst they might take a bit of winter damage, they're certainly going to look a bit tatty after a cold winter. They will grow back, or should grow back just fine. So I don't need to worry about any winter protection. And the main reason that I planted them here was to have a mass of colourful foliage that pretty much is evergreen, and it looks good from the house most of the year. There are plants like hosta which naturally die down for winter, but obviously there's that many plants in that border there that it's going to be crowded out and you won't really notice it in winter anyway. But whilst all these plants need very little care, there are a few houseplants dotted in. We've got a Tradiscentia there and with some spider plants just pressed into the gaps in the stonework there. So those, they're probably not the hardiest plant, but actually spider plants are surprisingly hardy. In some locations, in mild winters, they can potentially survive, but with these, as they're just literally pressed in, using a bit of turf to actually push into the gaps in the stone, those, I might take them out and just pop them up in the polytunnel over winter, because those will freeze through really easily, so I'll take them out, and then the rest of it is pretty much going to stay as it is. But heading on through, my big cactus there, that's an Echinocactus grusonii. That I'm going to bring inside Overwinter. So hopefully Alice doesn't notice that just appearing on the dining table. It's an absolute monster. If you can't tell from my hand there, it is maybe around 40 centimetres wide. It's a beast. But heading on through then. So the first plant you see in this border here is a Salvia, the Amistad, and that it's flowering strongly. Like I mentioned in my video, that is one of my star performers this year. It's absolutely incredible just how long it's gone on. And with those, well, I think generally, traditionally, they were regarded as a half tender or half hardy plant. So people dug them up, put them in a polytunnel. Whereas now, I think with our consistently milder winters, maybe our shorter winters, they are generally all right left outside. So what I might do with a few of them, because I've actually got 5 or 6 in total, is just chop them right down to the base as we have the first hard frosts, and then just maybe mulch them with a bit of straw or something. The other 3, I'll probably dig up and put them into the polytunnel, just try to get as much root as possible, purely because there's a few that I want to move anyway, and also they're a form of insurance plant. So even with plants that should make it through in our modern winters, I think it's worth keeping 1 or 2 in a polytunnel or greenhouse if you've got the option there, just to make sure you get some for next year. And looking back here, we've got some more Persicaria there. And then the Tetrapanax, which I know it's been a real big plant this year. There's been a lot of hype around it. But one thing I would say is you don't need to worry too much about protecting it. As much as you probably got picked up a small one this year, it's your baby. You really want to give it all the care you can. They are generally quite tough plants. And as you can see there, they do grow pretty quickly. That one at the back there was only a small plant this time last year, and it's already got around 2.5 foot of trunk, and it's putting out these really big leaves. So all I do with Tetrapanax is basically fleece them when it gets really cold. So as winter begins, you'll notice the first frost just turn the leaves to black. They might even just need cold temperatures, and the leaves are basically deciduous in most places. Obviously, again, if you're on the south coast, if you live somewhere sheltered or you're in the middle of London, you will get the green leaves for a lot longer and potentially all the way through winter. But here in the real world up north, it will get cold and those leaves will blacken. So pretty much all you're going to be left with is a trunk. But the worst thing you can do is to wrap it up, especially in fleece, something like that, all winter long. Because all that does is it traps some moisture in, and there's a lot higher chance of the plants rotting off and not making it through. So honestly, all I do with those is basically just cover the growing point if there's a late frost. So how I tend to view it, when looking at the Tetrapanax, looking in the middle there, you'll see you've got the new leaves, the small leaves just coming through, like that one there. Those are the only bit of the plant I try to protect, and even then, not in the middle of winter. I tend to think of the plant as dormant during the winter months, but when it starts actively growing, maybe next March or April, that's when I just put a bit of fleece over. But for the rest of the winter, the absolutely tough plants, don't go over the top and don't protect them. Worst case, if there is a really bad winter and that trunk does actually die, the plant should come back again from the roots and it'll soon get back up to this size. So, looking at a couple others in this bit, we've got the Musa basjoo, the first of them here. So that plant there, again, it was only a small plant this spring that time. It was actually planted out around 1 foot tall, and already it's got to around 3 foot. So not massive growth, but it's done well. So with that one, I don't want to dig it up, and it will be staying outside. And all I'll do is maybe let the frost actually blacken those leaves. And if it looks like it's going to be quite a chilly winter, quite a cold winter with lots of temperatures below zero, then I'll put some canes up around it. Just basically put 3 or 4 canes around it, wrap those in fleece, pack it with straw, and then put something like a plant pot over the top just to keep that sort of rain out. So you've got quite a dry insulated enclosure, basically like a coat for the plant. Because Musa basjoo, they are tough and they are very hardy, but when they're young, they might just need a little bit of extra care. But again, if you've got a big plant, if you live in a central city location, you shouldn't need to do anything, they should be absolutely fine. Looking back there, that's one of my Trachycarpus princeps hybrids. That I'll just leave to it. I think with plants like that are tough, that should be able to take some severe cold, anything you do to wrap it up is more likely to do harm than good. So I just leave that well alone. And looking down, all the nasturtiums, those, they're basically an annual, and they'll probably self-seeded around the border anyway, or everywhere. Those I'll just be ripping them all out as soon as we get a frost and getting them composted. So, looking in here, there's a bit of a mixture of plants, and the ones that you can see with the large glossy leaves in front of you, they're Alocasias, and those I basically treat as a houseplant over winter. Because unlike some Colocasias that can be dry stored, personally I think the Alocasias, like these, which are Brisbaneensis, I think they're best off if you keep them growing over winter, because they take a lot of work to start them up again if they do actually dry out. So with these, all I'll literally do with the Alocasia there, and this Odora there, is just literally dig them up. They don't need a huge amount of roots, put them in a pot and keep them as a house plant somewhere inside that's quite bright. Don't let them completely dry out, but certainly keep them on the dry side. And that's basically all you need to do. Now, the one plant you might have noticed me skipping past here is this massive fern here. And that, I might have mentioned it in a few previous videos, it's a Cyathea medullaris. It's a tree fern, and as you can see in there, it's known as the black tree fern. Now, it's got the potential to be an absolutely huge tree fern, but unfortunately, this far north, it's certainly not a guaranteed hardy one. It's certainly not as tough as the Dicksonia antartica like that one there. So with that, I am expecting to have to do some sort of level of, deeper protection. Something to actually keep that trunk going through winter. I will try to save these massive fronds because they're absolutely huge, but realistically, a hard frost might see those off. However, the good news is the plant grows really quickly and it should put some new ones out next spring. So with that, what I'll probably do is something similar to the Musa basjoo. Just basically build a small enclosure. I might even use some insulation sheets just around the actual trunk and pack it full of straw. So that way, the trunk and that growing point just in the middle there, I can zoom in and show you that. That growing point with all the new fronds about to unfurl, that will be protected from the cold. And then I'll probably just let the fronds just sort of take the chances, really. It might be mild winter, they might stay green, or they might take a bit of damage like that one there. But either way, the actual plant itself should be fine. It's reasonably tough, but I think this far north, it's certainly something I've taken a chance on. Heading on through then, you might notice I've got quite a few of these in the garden. This is actually just one leaf here of an Ensete Maurelii, which is the red banana plant, or banana relative anyway, and it's probably the #1 plant that people ask about what I do over winter. Now for smaller plants like this is only quite a small one that I planted as a plug plant in around early summertime. Because it's in quite a shady spot here, under those big trees, it's not grown hugely well. When they're this size, they are actually quite problematic, because essentially to dry store or to keep a plant ticking over, it needs quite a lot in the way of reserves in the actual trunk. Now, I know it's not technically a trunk, it's a pseudo stem, but if you look there, it's not really that chunky. So it hasn't got that much in the way of reserves. And that plant, I might have to keep it ticking over just on the dry side as a house plant. But I suppose the good news is, when you've got them in smaller size like this, that haven't absolutely pushed for growth all summer, they are quite easy and quite cheap to replace next year. And I suppose don't really beat yourself up too much if you don't get one this small through winter. They're definitely a lot easier to overwinter when they get bigger. So the best thing really you can do, plant one out in May next year, put it in a sunny spot, give it some good soil, plenty of water, plenty of feed, and get it as big as possible, and that way you've got the best chance of overwintering it. Looking through there, now the first thing you'll see with the bright red plant there and the yellow one, they're Coleus. Now you might hear a few different things about Coleus. Some people take cuttings at this time of year and overwinter them that way. Other people just leave them and basically use them as bedding, let the frost get them, or root them up and put them on the compost. I've done it both ways. Personally, I don't tend to bother overwintering them, just because space is at an absolute premium in the winter months, and they're so cheap, so easy to grow. You can either buy seed, plant them in sort of February, March time next year, or you can buy them as plug plants like I did this year for about £1 something, £2 each. It's not really worth wasting a lot of my overwintering space looking after those, so I'll probably just buy new ones. I don't like a sort of disposable culture, but equally, they're nice zingy plants that grow quite big from a small plant. You get a lot of value for the money from them. And if you look there, that red plant, that's actually a bromeliad, which is definitely a house plant. It won't tolerate any sort of cold temperatures. So that one is definitely coming inside, and it'll probably live in the bathroom, somewhere like that, with a nice bit of humidity, nice bit of indirect light. It should be absolutely fine there. So before I head through the tree fern avenue, let's look at this plant here. This you'll have seen featured in lots of my previous videos. It's the Hedychium ginger. It's Hedychium gardnerianum. And this one is in a big pot, which might look expensive, but it's actually got a big crack down the back. Don't tell anyone, but it's a bit of a Facebook marketplace bargain. It's about 20 quid, I think. It's absolutely huge. So this one, I'll be wheeling this into the polytunnel. Gingers, they are quite tough plants, and they are what I class as hardy, so they can actually take a fair amount of cold. But these and the small palm in the pot there, that's a waggy. Any plant in a pot is more liable to freezing through. So when you've got hardy plants like the waggy, you're better off moving them somewhere sheltered for the winter months. That's how I look after my potted plants. Just put them somewhere that just keeps the worst of the cold away. For the ginger, something that it's even more liable to freezing through, that I'll just shift it into the polytunnel and basically just leave it as it is. I don't water it a lot in the winter, just keep it literally ticking over, no need to feed it. And what you'll find, all these old stems will be replaced next May, and there'll be a load of new fresh growth popping through again. So absolutely don't need to worry about it a lot. And it's a plant that once you've moved it into the polytunnel, it's in there, it's done. You don't need to worry about it until next year. So, heading on through then, this is Tree Fern Avenue with all my Dicksonia antarcticas, and these, they are a tough, hardy plant. So, my general winter preparation for these, as that dog's absolutely yapping away in the background, is basically a 3-stage process. So, at the minute, I don't do anything. We haven't had a frost here yet. The weather's maybe got a bit cold, a bit close to one, but there's certainly no frost. And one thing you might know about tree ferns is that the part you want to protect is actually this crown here. It's the new fronds that are ready to unfurl just under there, and this top section of trunk. That's the bit that can potentially be damaged more by the cold. So what I do, the first step, this is when you start to get frosty nights coming up, or quite a few consistently frosty nights. I just put some straw in that crown. Now, I do know some people don't use straw because it can get damp, it can get waterlogged, but personally I've not had any issues. And as you'll notice here, The tree fern naturally collects a lot of leaves in that crown. I probably should have left that there, to be fair. And I think in the wild, they would, again, naturally collect a lot of leaves and organic matter in that crown. So in colder areas, it naturally protects it anyway. But what you can do is just use a ball of fleece. And by ball of fleece, probably sounds basic, you probably hear it all the time, but it is just literally some old fleece scrunched up and pushed into the middle there. And you can sort of tie it onto the front just to sort of keep it weighted down. And that, in a mild winter, is pretty much all you need to do. That's the only way that I set them up. Now, if temperatures do look like they're going to dip down further, if we've got, say, a -3 forecast, maybe even lower than that even, then I wrap the top foot of trunk. And again, I just get some fleece, you can double it up if you want, and just literally wrap it all the way around a few times, and that just gives that growing point a bit of extra protection. Now, if it does look like it's going to get really cold, and really cold, for me, has two different definitions. It can be an absolute low, say lower than -6, or it can be the duration of the cold. So like in February this year, we had a week of freezing temperatures. Well, not quite a week of freezing temperatures, but quite consistently cold, and it rarely went above freezing. What I did then is just literally wrap the whole trunk. I actually bought in advance a big roll of fleece so I could just wrap the whole thing, and then it just gives them a little bit of extra protection. I think the key thing to remember is that fleece doesn't actually warm the plant up, but it just sort of helps it keep a little bit, a little bit warmer. Maybe not warmer, it's not the right word, but it keeps that frost out for a little bit longer. So temperatures that might damage it, combined with the wind, something as simple as wrapping fleece around it is pretty much all you need to do. So looking around here again, you might start to see a theme as more of the same plants pop up. Another Alocasia there, I used to fill a gap. That is a ricinus. Winter protection for those, nice and easy, straight on the compost heap. They grow so quick, I don't bother overwintering them. Plus they'd end up getting leggy in the polytunnel anyway and just taking up a lot of space. So, heading round, here you can see one of my favourite little bits of greenery, some of my favourite foliage plants. There's a bit of a mixture, and the one that's in the middle is a Schefflera. So that, it looks similar to Taiwaniana, but it's actually a Schefflera. I don't really know a lot about the different sorts in terms of their exact differences. I imagine it's where they're found, there's slight variations in the leaves. All I know is this is a very attractive plant. And it's also, good news, a very tough plant. So that, I won't be doing anything to it. Even if it gets really cold, I'll pretty much be leaving it to it. Worst case, it might get a bit of damage to the growing point, but it should be able to outgrow that. And chances are, if you do have a Schefflera that gets damaged, it's either in a pot, in which case you should move it somewhere sheltered, or potentially growing it in the wrong kind of space. So Scheffleras, they enjoy somewhere that's humid, a bit of shelter, a bit of overhead protection maybe. So somewhere like this is absolutely perfect. But if you were growing that in a rural location, in the middle of maybe a south-facing wall with no other plants around it, it won't like it in summer and especially won't like it in winter. So like a lot of plants with those, it's not so much the protection you give it in winter, but the way you set it up and where you plant it in the first place. Looking around then, we've got Canna clover grass. That naturally sort of fades away in autumn anyway, so I'm not worried about that. There's loads of tough evergreen ferns, which again I don't do anything to. There's no need to do anything. At the back there, we've got Fatsia polycarpa. That's Needham's form, similar to the green fingers one you can get at most garden centres. And that, I'll treat it just the same as the other Fatsia. So when they get to that size, they are really, really tough plants. And like I said, the worst you might get is a bit of damage to the new growing points, but I certainly wouldn't worry about overprotecting them. Probably one other plant to mention here, at the back there, we have got a fern that's not quite as hardy. But I suppose with ferns, if you're growing anything that's a little bit unusual, like this Terrace umbrosa, you generally know that they're not fully hardy. So with something like that, a bit of overhead cover is absolutely great, which here, as you can probably see, has been taken care of pretty naturally by that Dicksonia antartica there. And I just want this border long term to be an absolute mesh of these lovely green leaves. It's certainly heading that way. But let's keep on going through. This monstrous plant here then is a Zantedeschia Hercules. White Giant is very similar, but they're an amazing foliage plant that has huge white flowers as well. And this one, it was only a very small plant. It was a small division early in this spring that got kindly given to me. And as you can see, it's already bulked up really well, put on a lot of growth. So they're certainly very vigorous. And the good news is they're quite tough as well. I've heard varying sort of reports and temperatures on these. And personally, I don't like to quote specific minimum temperatures. I think this is a good example, really. I've heard some people, and I've seen it written on some websites, they take around -5 to -6. But I had a few smaller plants dotted around the garden last year. The winter cut them right down to the ground, but this spring they all came through and they've all come back again. I do suspect if you've got a larger plant like this, then it's going to be even tougher. But I also think that the best way of getting a bigger plant with something like this is to give it a little bit of protection, to give it the best head start next year. So with these, this is probably my biggest and my best, and I'm tempted to actually dig it up and keep it in the polytunnel. You could put it in a greenhouse over winter, something like that. Keep it sort of moistish. But then again, if it's a mad winter, I might just regret not leaving it out. So I need to think about that myself. But it's either going to be a plant that I move into polytunnel and just keep it growing there steadily over the winter months, or a plant that I give a bit of straw protection to and expect it to take a bit of damage, because the actual leaves, they're quite soft, but that bit in the middle there, that's the bit you want to protect. And for me, if you can get something like this up to twice this size, 6 foot plus tall, maybe even taller than that, it's going to be absolutely incredible and well worth the effort. So, heading on through then. More gingers. These are in the ground. I could leave them in, but with the soil here being naturally quite damp, that sort of tends to make things a bit trickier, and it can lead to some plants rotting off. So I'll probably dig these up, and again, it gives me a chance to move things around and have a little play around the garden again next year. That bamboo's not the hardiest, but as a general rule, pretty much all the bamboos in the garden, I don't do anything to them. Ultimately, there's not a lot you can do to protect something that's maybe around sort of 10, 12 foot tall, but I'll leave it to it. It might get a bit of winter damage, but it should be absolutely fine. There's all kinds of little plants dotted around here, so I'll definitely miss some, but most of them you will notice the repetitions. So we've got more Coleus here, we've got some spider plants dotted around, and those, I will actually try leaving some spider plants outside, because like I said, in a mild winter they should be absolutely fine. In a colder winter they might not, but I'm willing to take my chances. I've got plenty of them dotted around. Looking around here then, that is actually one of the Zantedeschias, the small ones that I left in the ground last winter, and you can see it's definitely grown well this year. Not grown amazingly, but it's certainly come back, so they can definitely take some cold. That plant there is a Pseudopanax. There's quite a few different varieties, and they're all pretty much on average very tough. You don't need to do anything to them. That's grown well this year, and you won't really see a lot in the way of winter damage. I suspect they can take a serious amount of cold, so that I'm just going to leave exactly as it is. And as you can see, when you start actually analysing the garden around me, a lot of it, it's more repetitions of plants that I've already looked at. So plants that don't need a lot of protection, or plants that just need, like this ginger here, digging up, moving to polytunnel, and then leaving to it. Again, there's a ricinus that I'll maybe harvest the seeds on. Those seeds, as they turn brown, you can actually get the seeds from it and then plant them again next April, May, maybe even early June, and they'll form big plants, maybe even taller than this one. Heading on through then, the first thing we'll look at are all the potted plants I've got dotted around here. It's a bit of a mess, you'll have to forgive all the leaves and the weeds, but I wanted to get this video out today. So, first thing, you'll see all the Trachycarpus hybrid palms. They are really tough. Small plants aren't as hardy as bigger ones, and potted plants aren't as hardy as those that are in the ground, because that pot and all the roots that are inside can just freeze through so much quicker. And if it's got frozen roots, a palm, well, it's going to have to be very tough to survive. So those, I'll probably just keep them in a polytunnel, or move them in there if it gets really cold. The rest of the winter, I'll put them somewhere sheltered, so somewhere either close to the house, close to a wall, where they just get a bit of extra heat to keep them going through the colder spells. Now, the next thing you'll notice are the spikies. So there is a low polyphylla or polyphylla, absolutely beautiful spiral aloe. That's one I grew from seed. I planted it in 2016, so it's about 5 years old now. Happy birthday. It's generally quite a tough plant. It does actually get a bit of marking in wetter winters, but the one thing you don't want to do is to actually completely protect it and move it inside. They don't want to completely dry out, and they're actually plants from mountainous areas, so in their sort of habitat they're used to having cold temperatures, but they obviously need good drainage and they need a large amount of water to keep them growing strongly. They're not an aloe that needs to be completely dried out, and with those, I think the best thing you can do, if it's planted out, plant on a slope so that cold water can drain off it and it doesn't end up freezing through and rotting from the top there. If it's in a pot like this, then what I tend to do is just move it somewhere sheltered. So again, close to a house, somewhere that's maybe got a bit more warmth than just being out in the open, you know, with all the frost that can come from the sky like that. So here, next to it, we've got agaves. That's Agave Blue Glow, and that's a Mangave there. Now, these aren't the most cold hardy varieties. You might find some people in the US actually grow these outside, or maybe even on the south coast. I'd try it myself. If I lived in central London, I'd certainly have them planted out. Up here, again, it's one of those decisions really. It's more a case of weighing up the risks, and I tend to think really that our winters are just too wet for them. So what you could do, if you want to take your chances, give them some kind of overhead cover. And when I say overhead cover, what people tend to do is get a polycarbonate sheet, put some legs on it, some wooden legs, and then use that to keep the winter rain out. Because with these, it's not the cold that will necessarily kill them. Obviously, if it's minus 15 or minus 20, they won't stand a chance. But it's more when the rain collects in that rosette there, which is probably designed for actually collecting rainfall in its arid habitat. When it gets that rain here, it just freezes through and the plant will turn to, well, it will turn to a black mushy mess in no time. So with those, what I'll do is actually bring them inside. And I've got an end room, which I'm actually very privileged to be able to use as a sort of dry greenhouse until I get mine actually delivered here. So those will go in there and I'll just keep them on the dry side, keep plenty of ventilation, because the worst thing with any kind of spiky plant is to actually wrap it up all winter long. Because what that does is it traps that moisture inside, even breathable fleece, it traps that humidity in and the plant will rot through in no time. In some ways, you're better off let them take the chances with the cold. If there's anything you can do though, it's basically just keep an overhead cover, keep that rain out, and it gives them the absolute best chance. Looking up there then, that is a Phoenix canariensis, which is probably the second most common palm in the UK. Well, let's say it's the second most commonly sold, but not the second most commonly grown, because most of them don't make it. Most of them are planted out in small sizes, in the wrong kind of locations. Here in North Lincolnshire, it probably is the wrong location, which is why I've got it planted. It's close to that brick shed there, so it's got a bit of extra protection. And if you're new to tropical gardening, you might not know the relevance of having a brick building. It basically just radiates a bit of warmth. So even that low winter sun in the December days, that wall will actually absorb a bit of that heat. And during the night, it'll give that out again. If you've got any kind of heater or anything in that shed, it will just radiate it out. And it's a game of really marginal sort of increases. A plant that can be kept 1 or 2 degrees warmer, it can mean all the difference between life and death, or a plant that's marked and a plant that just pulls through with absolutely no damage whatsoever. So with this, I do expect a bit of browning like this to the end of the leaves, but I'm not worried about it. What I'll probably do is just fleece it if it gets to around, so we'll say -5 or lower. I'll put some fleece, just chuck it over the top of the whole thing and hope that works. In reality, it's getting to the point now where it's a little bit big to properly protect unless I build a proper structure over it. I'll do what I can with it, but the worst thing again you can do is wrap it up all winter long, because like the agaves, like the spiky plants, they still need to breathe. So that doesn't want to be wrapped up in a wet, humid sort of fleece wrapping for 3 or 4 months or even longer. The best thing you can do is just wrap it when it absolutely needs it. Moving through then, I've got a palm, that's a Butea odorata. That's just one that I haven't planted yet. There's a Musa Dwarf banana there, Dwarf Cavendish there. I've got a Cyathea brownii tree fern there, and another Musa Dwarf there. So, generally speaking, as I mentioned previously, potted plants are not as hardy as those that are in the ground. So that Butea, that won't be as tough as one you've actually got planted out. And that's again just because the roots can actually freeze through a lot quicker if they're raised above the ground. And with that being a small plant as well, again, it's not quite as tough. So that will just get moved to somewhere reasonably sheltered. It might go in the polytunnel, or it might just go close to the house. The Musa Dwarf, with those, obviously, they are a hardy banana. But again, if it's in a pot, it probably isn't, because that rhizome or that root below the ground, that is just in a small pot, so it's more liable to freezing through. So those, I'll just plant them. Well, sorry, I won't even plant them. I'll just move the pot straight into the polytunnel. And these leaves, those will end up getting browned or blackened off, because I won't keep the polytunnel anything other than frost-free. So those might end up dying off, but the plant itself, that pseudo stem will survive, and then next spring I'll just chop it back to there and new leaves will start coming out. So that's nice and easy to look after. The cycad, again, those, they're not the most hardy plant, but you could actually plant them outside. I know Yorkshire Chris has got one, a couple of people do, and they just wrap it up for the cold spells. But with that one being in the pot, I might just put it in the polytunnel, just so then I've got the extra security. I know it's one less plant to wrap, and one that should be absolutely fine. So, looking through there, that's a Dwarf Cavendish banana. Now that one isn't as hard as a Musa Dwarf. It won't be able to take any sort of frost. I know a lot of people say minimum 10 degrees, but realistically I think that's the way you should treat it. So now, although we had some nights in the 5 to 6 degree region, there's nothing frosty yet. It's got a bit of overhead cover, but certainly before the next round of cold nights, when it might actually get frosty and dip below 5 degrees, that's going to be moving inside. I'll trim off some of the leaves that are further down it there that look a bit tatty, and that's basically going to be a house plant. I might put it in the bathroom. It sounds like in these videos like I've got a huge bathroom. We really haven't, but I'll try and find somewhere for it. Somewhere with a bit of humidity and nice indirect light. Musa basjoo again, that's going to go in the polytunnel. And this tree fern, the Cyathea brownii, it's probably not even quite as hardy as the medullaris. It is hypothetically the biggest tree fern you can grow, so I'm excited to see it grow, but it's in a 70-litre pot. So that one will be going into the polytunnel, where I'll do the best I can to keep the actual trunk and that new frond there away from the frosty edges. So heading round then, that's a large Ensete there, and how I look after those is basically before it's actually going to be frosty, so before it gets to, we'll say definitely below 5 degrees, I dig them up. And it's quite straightforward. You can see there they've got quite a large base on the actual trunk or pseudostem. I just literally dig the spade in around it. You don't need a lot of soil, just enough to really sort of keep that base intact. And then I chop all the leaves off. It might sound brutal, but honestly you're doing the best thing you can to keep the plant for next year. And just literally chop them all off around there. I don't chop them back too tight, because what I find is wherever you chop them off, there's bound to be some element of sort of dye back. It might end up going a bit mushy, so you'd rather have that mushiness well away from the trunk so it doesn't spread, just to give you a little bit of extra security. But if you imagine, although it looks like a big banana now, once these leaves are chopped back and once it's dug up, it's not actually that big. Now, one thing that I do with these that's a bit different, I don't actually dry store them, mainly because I don't really have the space to. And all I do is put the whole plant, once it's chopped down and chopped back, into a pot of dry compost. Now, I don't use a big pot because that'll trap too much moisture in. A pot that's just about big enough to fit the base in. And that, I'll fill it with maybe some coir, some coconut coir, which is a peat substitute, or just some old compost. All you basically wanted to do is just prop that plant up and have a growing medium that's ready for it to start growing next spring. Now, there's a few crucial things with Ensetes, and the first thing, the absolutely essential thing that you need to do is just dry it out as much as possible. Now, that is actually a sort of, if there's a few steps to doing this, the first thing is you'll notice where all these leaves come away from the actual pseudostem there's an area where water collects. And chances are, when I dig these up, it'll be around late October, maybe even early November. It will be coming up pretty soon. The first thing I'll do is drain all the water out those actual leaf bases, because it will be raining a lot over the next month. We tend to have wetter autumns these days, so I'll drain the water out of there. And then I just sort of ideally leave them somewhere that's got a bit of overhead cover, let the wind whip around them, let it dry them out further, let those cut leaf bases actually dry out. Ideally, if you've got somewhere maybe like a garage or some kind of, a shed's probably not ideal, but somewhere that's ventilated, it'll help dry it out even further. And then I'll just stand it up inside in a pot that's just about big enough for it, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Another little tip that I use is to actually have a dehumidifier in the room, which I suppose you could use in a greenhouse, or, well, probably not even a polytunnel because there's too much moisture in there and you might have it open to the ground. But in a greenhouse, if you use a dehumidifier, it'll just take the last of that moisture out of the plant. And I don't actually try to keep it growing through the winter months. I certainly wouldn't recommend keeping them as a house plant. As tempting as it is to keep something as beautiful as this growing over the winter months, the problem is, in a hot house without adequate light, the plant's going to get leggy, it's going to get lanky, and it'll end up getting spider mite infestations. It really isn't worth it. All I look to do is just to keep it ticking over till next February, March, ideally late March if possible, by which point I slowly start to increase the moisture, water it, just literally a couple of drips. Honestly, with these, when they get to this size, don't worry about watering it over winter. You'll do more harm than good. You'll increase the chance of rotting. But then in sort of March, April time, just give it a few sprinkles of water and then bang, it'll come bursting into life and be ready to plant out after the sort of last frost next spring. So it really is as easy as that. Dig the whole thing up, chop it all back, dry it out, put it in a pot, and ideally a cool room, maybe even a garage if you've got one joining to your house. I don't like to say shed because some sheds can be really cold, but somewhere that's frost-free and cool will be absolutely perfect. Next up then is a Canna. This one's Moutifolia, but how I look after any Canna, they're basically all the same. And all I do here, because we're in quite a damp garden, is basically chop those stems back to around 6 inches from the ground and just dig the whole clump up, Obviously be careful not to break it up, but just dig around it, put it into a pot that just about fits it, and move the whole thing into the polytunnel or greenhouse. So although it might look like a big plant at the minute, by the time you've chopped it down, it's not a lot to store, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoy growing cannas so much, because you get so much leaf, so much flower from something that doesn't take a lot of space to overwinter. And that's pretty much all there is to it. One thing that I will mention is you don't want them to completely dry out over winter. With a lot of the other plants, they're definitely better on the dry side, whereas with cannas, certainly keep them on the drier side, but you don't want them to completely dry out. But not like a dahlia that can be completely dry stored for the winter months. I don't think cannas do too well if they dry out, certainly not for any length of time. So I just like to keep that pot, just water it maybe every month or so. And what you might find is in a polytunnel that's not kept especially warm, they do stay quite damp anyway. But that's all you need to do, just keep it literally ticking over, just moist, and then as soon as the temperatures warm up next, we'll say April, May time, although realistically, hopefully it'll be a bit before then, but realistically be around sort of late May probably. When temperatures warm up, you'll see the new shoots appearing, and at that point then you can increase your watering, feed it a little bit and get it ready to plant out. Now, one thing you might know is that cannas are actually quite hardy these days anyway, and in most places, if you've got somewhere that's well drained, somewhere that's got full sun, they should be fine just left in the ground. If you've got them to any kind of depth, or if you mulch them with some old compost, something like that, they should be absolutely fine. But here in the garden, like I said, it is under a lot of trees and the soil is quite damp. So I think anything that's got damp soil, any garden, is more likely to, create overwintering problems, and plants like this actually just rot through. So I personally move that rhizome into the polytunnel. The advantages of that, although it's a bit of effort, it means that that plant is then protected from slug damage next spring. It's protected from those late frosts because you can just keep the polytunnel frost free. And also you can juggle the things around the garden, move things around and try different plants in different places, which is part of the fun of tropical gardening. So looking at a plant which is well, let's just say it's a bit of a mess this year. It certainly had a lot of bug damage. This is one of my 199 little brugmantias, and it does look a bit of a mess. But it's flowered well, it's put out a lot of nice flowers. Although it wasn't the colour that I wanted, it's done alright. So that, I'll be digging that up before the frost, put it into a pot and keep it in the polytunnel, where I'm not worried about the actual leaves. It's just a case of keeping the stems from completely freezing through, and then it should burst into life again next spring. But like I said, the 199 from Lidl, so I might just wait till May and get some new ones for next year, we'll see. Spinning on around then, you'll see a slightly sickly looking citrus plant, which I'm surprised I actually said first time. Potentially this one could have done with a bit more tomato feed a couple months ago, just to avoid some of the leaves going yellow, but they'll soon turn a dark green colour when I feed it next spring. Now the important thing with citrus plants is not to bring them inside your house, because what you'll find is, unless you give them a lot of misting or special care, the humidity is just too low in a house. Central heating will dry them out, and they really need that moisture. So if you bring a citrus plant inside, take it straight from a damp garden into a dry house, it'll drop a lot of leaves. I'm not saying it will die, and they are very tough plants, but the best thing you can do really is bring it somewhere humid. I mean, potentially a bathroom somewhere bright in like a conservatory, but just make sure you keep that plant well watered and don't let it completely dry out. And what I actually do here is keep this one in the polytunnel. So they're actually a lot tougher than you'd expect in terms of cold tolerance, and as long as you've got that humidity there, they seem to fruit and leaf up really well again the next spring. So it's not a plant that I worry too much about how exactly it looks over winter, because I know it'll bounce back, and that's exactly what I'll be doing with it this winter, straight in the polytunnel. More cannas there, big Musa folias, and that's a Russian red, which is absolutely massive. I'd say that's probably, well, it's got to be around 8.5 foot tall. In face-up measurements, that's about 12 foot, isn't it? Another ginger there. Again, that's a potted one, the Hedychium gardnerianum. But like I've shown you previously, these will all be exactly the same. Leave the ginger as it is, drag the whole thing into polytunnel. Cannas, chop them down to the ground, dig them up in the polytunnel. Job done, nice and easy. Spinning round then, you'll see my favourite plant in the garden, or one of the three, is Gunnerat manicata. Now with this, it takes up a ridiculous amount of space in full growth with these huge leaves, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger, but it's nice and easy to overwinter. And the part you want to protect is that crown, which is literally obscured there. But in the middle of the plant, I'll try moving down to show you the next one. You can probably just about see it in there, that centre with a pink sort of fuzziness to it. That is the crown of the plant, and that's the only bit you need to protect. So what you'll find is the first frost, it blackens the leaves. Just before that point, so before the temperatures get much below sort of 5 degrees, I like to cover the crown. And the easiest way, the traditional way, if you can have a traditional way of protecting a giant rhubarb from Brazil in the UK, it is basically chop the leaves off, just literally chop the whole stalk off and use them to cover the crown. So you basically make like a TP wigwam over the top of the crown, and that should be enough to protect it over the winter months. You can potentially chuck a bit of straw in there as well if you want. But what you'll find is the plants themselves, they are really tough. They can take a decent amount of cold, but it's more that protection at the end of winter that's the issue. And like I said in my videos looking at this plant earlier this year, it's worth protecting those new leaves because the new leaves start to grow in around March, April time, maybe even earlier. It's worth protecting them from frost because potentially they can be the biggest. Like that one there, that was the first leaf from this plant this year. It was worth protecting it because just look at the size of it. Absolutely incredible plants. Trachycarpus fortunei there, covered in the berries. Those I don't do anything to. If you've got a small Trachycarpus, like a really small plant, you can potentially move it somewhere sheltered. But with plants this size, it would take a serious amount of cold to actually justify wrapping them. So unless you live literally in like the Highlands of Scotland or somewhere very exposed like that, you should be absolutely fine. More cannas there. That's Altensteinii flowering, quite a nice flower. Those actually grew from seed this year. So if you haven't got the room to actually overwinter cannas, then you could just grow them from seed. Personally, I like to do a mixture. Going through then, you can actually see now the garden's actually broken down. You can see gunra again, tree fern again, Zantedeschia again. I like the repetition of plants. I think it helps tie the garden together and you know where you are at the end of the year. Plus, I just like growing them. So Persicaria, it's a bit of a mess here between Red Dragon and Purple Fantasy. Might need to chop them back a little bit, but those, the frost will wipe them out, but they'll be absolutely fine. Schefflera there, that large one is Taiwaniana, which again I won't do anything to, but probably again similar to one that I showed you previously. The best thing in terms of protecting it is where you plant it. So this one here, it's got a nice bit of overhead cover on this cherry tree. Yes, it won't have the leaves in winter, but it still gives it a little bit of shelter. That nice palm there is Trachycarpus wagnerianus, and just like the small one, I won't protect this. It will take some substantial cold to damage it. And worst case is, if it does get to maybe, say even like -8 or something, the new leaf or frond will get a bit of damage, new leaf even, but it'll soon outgrow it and it'll soon send out more. So spinning round then, another Musa basjoo there, that's grown really well. Again, that was about 1 foot tall. And it's already put on quite a big sort of stem now. So that plant will get a bit of wrapping around it, but I'll only do it when it absolutely needs to, because the longer you wrap a plant up and the more moisture you get in there, the more likely it is to rot. So that I'll just leave it to it, and if it looks like it's going to be substantially below 0, I'll wrap the whole thing up. Again, just using 4 sort of stems or canes around it, wrap them with fleece and pack the whole thing with straw. Moving along. This looks like a bit of a jungle of plants at the minute, and not necessarily in a good way. But the big one at the back there is a boutia. It's a feather palm, but one of the best you can grow here in the UK. And it's Eriuspatha or Eriuspatha, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It's a very tough plant. It can take severe cold, but we'll say -6 is about my own threshold. And if it gets close to that, I just put a bit of fleece over the top. And this one, it's taller than me, so we'll say it's around 7 or 8 foot tall. It's a bit tricky to completely protect it. But if it got significantly colder than that, I would consider tying all the fronds together, just tying the whole plant in and just covering the whole thing with a fleece bag, just to keep that extra sort of cold off it. But potentially it should be absolutely fine and it shouldn't really need any protection at all. That's the way I'm hoping the winter's going to go, but we'll see. Spinning round then, we've got Colocasia esculenta, and my practice of overwintering these has actually evolved over time. I think with any kind of plants like these that I grow here, you've got to be open to evolving and changing your methods. No one can know everything, and at the end of the day, we're growing plants that people haven't grown here for that long. They're quite experimental. Each garden's different, every location's different, so it's well worth trying different things out, as long as you know the basic principles. So these esculenta, Before, at the old house, my first couple of years there, we had a conservatory, and I used to treat it basically like a greenhouse. So they won't like being in a cold polytunnel or greenhouse. It'll just get too cold, they'll be too damp, and they'll end up rotting off. Or that's at least what I found in my experience anyway. My next step was trying them in a conservatory, basically just keeping them ticking over, but what I found is, again, they're liable to rotting. Because even though it was a conservatory and joined the house, it wasn't heated, and again, it just got too cold, and potentially I was giving them too much water. So now, what I do, this is just with Esculenta, I dig up the whole plant, and basically just dry it out. So I chop all the leaves off, all the stem off, all the roots off, and then I just leave it on the side in a cool room, plenty of ventilation to it. That's exactly what I did this year. And then I potted them up in around late April, early May in the polytunnel, potted them up in soil, gave them some water, and bang, bit of heat and they're growing again. It's as simple as that. So in my eyes, something that grows fast and is easy to restart, like Esculenta, you don't need to do anything more than that. Just dry store them is the absolute easiest way. If you have got some more unusual varieties of Colocasia, then you might have to keep them as a houseplant, because not every variety grows back quite as easily. And at the other end of the scale, if you've got pink china, which I did actually have one in that water there, you can just about see it, but probably a better example, or just to let you know the results of that experiment, the ones that are in the ground grew far better, as pretty much everyone predicted. At the back there, you'll see a Colocasia pink china leaf. Those, I'm going to leave them in the ground. They're absolutely tough, absolutely hardy. People like Yorkshire Chris, up in Yorkshire, obviously, growing them for years, they can take some serious cold, so I'm not going to bother with them. Nice nasturtium there, just weaving its way through that boutia leaf. So this area is a bit of a mess with recent wind, but you'll see dahlias. Check out that nasturtium leaf, by the way. It's just amazing, isn't it? So dahlias, if you're happy with how the plants look, obviously not right now, but if you're happy with where they are and how they fit in with your garden plan, leave them in the ground. I think now, modern winters, most UK gardens, you should be absolutely fine leaving dahlias in the ground. As long as they're quite deep, or again you mulch them with some old compost or something like that, they should be absolutely fine. The actual plant above the ground, the bit that looks like a bit like a potato plant, I guess, that will die back, but the tuber under the ground will start sprouting again, maybe April, May next year, and because you've left it undisturbed, it'll grow so much better. But here, because I'm indecisive and like moving things around, I probably will dig them up. I'll just completely take all the soil off the tuber, and then I'll put it somewhere that's frost-free, like in the shed, maybe in some dry coconut coir, or some kind of old dry compost, and those I will let them dry out. So unlike the Canna, dahlias, they store best if you let them completely dry out, and then pot them up, give them some water, maybe next March time in the polytunnel, keep them frost-free, and they'll soon come back into growth. Looking back at this mess on the other side then, we've got the Miscanthus grass. Now Miscanthus giganteus, there's a few different sorts. They all behave the same. They all grow really fast from around sort of March, April time through to around the early June. They grow really tall. You think they'll be great for screening, but the problem is they turn brown in winter. And this one will turn over the next month or so. They do look a bit of a mess, but equally, if it's at the fire in your garden, just leave it. Leave it for the insects. And then what you do, when it comes to spring, just chop the whole thing back before the new growth comes through. That's a crucial bit. It makes your life a lot easier. Chop the whole thing back, compost the brown bit, and then you've got a plant ready to grow again next year. They're really, really tough. Pretty much any grass or any Miscanthus is used to severe cold in its habitat, so it should be absolutely fine in a UK garden. Going through them, look at those. They're absolutely incredible, don't they? The sedums, or what you now call Hylotelephium, but in my head, the sedums. It's one of the few plants I've actually kept from the garden that was here before, although there wasn't actually a lot, to be fair. I just like the colours, really. I think they work well with the feather palms as well. Now, look in there. That's a small volcano or volcano palm. That, it should be absolutely fine, but if it gets mega cold, I'll fleece it. But the Trachycarpus there, that's a strip trunk Fortunii. I'll do absolutely nothing for that. And likewise, this yucca, it's the Gloriosa, that are split up to make more plants are dotted around the border. They're a really tough plant. I'll do absolutely nothing to look after. They should be absolutely fine. Worst case might be a bit of spotting on the leaves, but generally speaking, I think if you choose a good one and it doesn't display that in the first few years, it should be absolutely fine. Looking further back then, that's another standard C. humilis. either Camarops, Chamrops or Chimerops. I've heard it pronounced a load of different ways. Probably Camarops is the best one, so we'll go for that. They're really tough and very, very hardy, especially with good drainage here, a lot of exposure, a lot of air movement. They should be absolutely fine. So here, we've got a few spices that are actually planted out. Now, the cacti there, they're more for novelty value and they will be dug up and brought inside. But this here is an agave and it's Ovatifolia, which along with Montana, that I also grow here, is one of the hardiest varieties you can grow in the UK. Now, that should actually be fine. Here, with plenty of sun, plenty of exposure, it should actually be fine. And also the fact that it's raised up as well, planted into this bank that I've made, it should be able to tolerate pretty much any weather that the UK can chuck at it. But one thing I might do, just to give it a little bit of a better chance, is to give it, again, some overhead protection. Just to keep the water from collecting in between there, because it's that water that'll freeze through and just cause it to rot so much quicker. But that's pretty much all I need to do for that. Again, for the Montanas that I've got dotted around, those I'm excited, probably more than any plant in the garden. Well, that's probably a lie. I'm really excited to see those size up. When they get bigger, maybe 3 foot across, they look absolutely incredible. Potentially that one's a bit close to that rock, but yeah, we'll see. So this Jubea here, the elephant in the room, the one that I haven't talked about, it's probably my favourite palm, and it's a plant that's well known for its hardiness. It's the toughest feather palm you can grow here in the UK. They're absolutely incredible. And with that, it's not a plant I want to protect or even need to protect. It will take some severe cold to damage that. And we're talking temperatures of -8 maybe and lower. If there was a week where I knew it was going to be freezing solid with temperatures reaching or surpassing -7, -8, I would start to fleece it, wrap the whole plant, give it a bit of overhead cover again maybe. But realistically, in most modern UK winters, you shouldn't need to do anything for those. The best thing you can do to protect a Jubea or any kind of feather palm, raise it up, make sure it's got good drainage, because it's not the actual plant that'll be affected by the cold, but the roots. If they're sat in cold, wet soil, if it's waterlogged in heavy clay, it really won't like that. But if you've got good drainage, quite an exposed sunny spot, it should be absolutely fine. Euphorbia there, one of the plants that's actually grown the best in the garden, sized up really well. But in front of it, you'll see an Hedychium. Now, these up north here, they are a bit of a gamble. I've had one to flowering before, but some years they don't make it. And the main issue is they're a biennial, or should I say they can actually take a few years to flower. So you need a consistent string of mild winters to actually get them going through that. This one here, this might flower next year, or it might flower the year after. So really, it's rolling the dice for year on year, and the chance of actually making it to flowering this far north, well, let's just see anyway, we'll see. What you'll find is a light frost is enough to sort of blacken the leaves, the lower leaves anyway, and the whole plant looks quite shriveled. But usually by the end of the day, if it comes back above freezing, the whole plant bounces back and it looks so much better. So these are a plant that could probably take a couple of degrees below zero, but once it gets to -5, -6, you might really struggle. Probably my best advice for these is, especially this far north, plant them, give them somewhere that's full sun, good drainage, everything that they like. Get the healthiest, biggest plants you can in the shortest time possible, and then really you just have to leave them to fend for themselves. Yes, you could potentially fleece it during some really cold spells, but ultimately it's a case of will it make it, will it not? You can't dig them up, you can't move them because they've got quite a big taproot and they really won't like it. So I think it's a case of you plant, you sow your seeds, you take your chances really. This one, because it's in such an exposed part of the garden at the end, it will be getting some fleece over it if it gets to really cold temperatures, but I know ultimately whether it makes it or not is pretty much out of my control, and I think that's a healthy mindset for them. Moving on, we've got a couple of aeoniums here. Those, I do take them inside for winter. I just dig the whole plant up, put it in a pot, which is getting increasingly tricky because they've got these massively heavy rosettes and then these long windy stems. They're a bit of a battle, but I'm sure I'll get them in. And one thing you'll find with aeoniums when you take them inside, because the humidity and the moisture is a lot lower than outside, some of these lower leaves will start to turn crispy and drop off. But as long as you've got some there in the middle of that rosette that stay healthy, you should be absolutely fine. Another Jubea there. See, I think that works really well with the sedums there, the Hylotelephiums. If there's anyone still watching this video at this point, then let me know what you think. But personally, I think they really fit the Mediterranean vibe. I might have to move a bit further away from the Jubea, but I quite like them. Agave Montana there, another Aeonium, and here again more repetition, another Euphorbia there as we end the sort of part of the garden I've actually finished working on, well finished for this year anyway. There's my big Pinus patula, which has grown so well this year. It was only a small plant this time a couple of years ago, and now it's already taller than me. Awesome. And looking back across here, got another Ricinus, which has turned out really well, but again I'll just let the frost get it, chop it down and use the leaves to actually feed back into the soil. And big bamboos that again I won't do anything with. One plant I have just skipped past, well obviously all the weeds have skipped past them, but this is an Aloe striatula or striatula. It's a really cool looking plant. It looks like those tender aloes that you get in America, place like that. They look absolutely incredible. But this one is hardy. So although this particular plant looks a bit ropey, it's a very tough plant that you shouldn't need to do anything with in winter. Plants like this Yucca linearis or linearifolia and rostrata, again they should be absolutely fine most UK winters. But the best thing you can do if they're small is maybe give them some kind of overhead cover. That's basically all there is to it. They're really tough plants. And that brings us to the end of the video. Quite a long one, well a very long one, but a walk through the garden so you can see where things are at now and the protection methods and tips that I use to keep them either growing strongly through the winter or keep them safe, ready to grow again next spring. So the three of you that actually made it through this far, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you picked up some tips and tricks here, but if there's anything that I haven't mentioned, any plans that I didn't look at or just completely whiz past, then let me know in the comments below. And if there's anything that you want specific information on how to overwinter, something you've seen in the garden here, you want to know the tips and the tricks to hopefully guarantee its survival to next year, well as close to guarantee as you can get it, then leave me a comment below. Thanks again for watching, I'll see you in the next video.